Elena Marsh woke before the sun, the way she always did. The small apartment above the diner was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the sound of her son breathing in the next room. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting herself feel the last minutes of peace before another long day began. 5 years had passed since she left everything behind. 5 years of waking early, working late, and keeping her eyes down whenever a stranger looked at her too long. She had built a small, careful life in this town, far from the packlands where she once believed she would spend forever. She had built it for one reason only: Caleb. She rose quietly and walked into his room. Her son was still asleep, one arm thrown over his stuffed wolf toy, his dark hair messy against the pillow. She smiled despite the tiredness in her bones. He looked so much like her in some ways, the shape of his mouth, the way his nose wrinkled when he laughed, but his eyes were not hers. His eyes were amber gold, flecked with light, striking enough that strangers sometimes paused to look twice. She had spent years telling curious neighbors that they came from his father's side of the family, and leaving it at that. She never told anyone who his father truly was. Elena had once been part of a world most humans never saw. She had crossed into packlands as a young woman working for a small trading company, delivering goods to remote communities. That was how she met Damien. He was not simply a man. He was the alpha king of the Blackthorn Pack, a leader respected and feared across the Northern Territories. Their meeting had been unplanned, almost accidental, in a quiet market square. He had helped her when her cart broke down, and what began as simple kindness slowly grew into something neither of them expected. Damien was nothing like the stories she had heard about alpha leaders. He listened when she spoke. He asked about her life, her hopes, her fears. Over months, their bond deepened into a connection so strong it frightened them both. Because pack law forbade an alpha king from taking a human mate. It was seen as a threat to bloodline purity, a challenge to old traditions that many in his court still upheld with fierce loyalty. Despite the danger, they could not stay apart. Their love grew in secret, in stolen hours and quiet meetings, until war broke out with a rival pack, and Damien was called away to lead his warriors into battle. Before he left, he promised Elena he would return. She believed him with her whole heart. Weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. She had barely begun to process the fear and joy of it when news came that Damien had fallen in battle, struck down defending his territory. The messenger's voice still echoed in her memory sometimes, flat and formal, delivering words that shattered her world. With grief crushing her chest and a child growing inside her, Elena understood the danger she was in. A human woman, carrying the air of an alpha king, without the alpha there to protect her, was not safe. Enemies within the pack, who resented Damien's affection for a human, would see the unborn child as a threat to be erased. She could not protect herself, let alone a baby, in a world ruled by power and old hatred. So she ran. She left behind everything she had known in that world, and disappeared into the human towns, changing her name, taking work wherever she could find it, always moving, until she felt safe enough to stop. She settled here, in this small town, and gave birth to Caleb alone, in a quiet hospital room, crying tears of both sorrow and love as she held her son for the first time. She built a life from nothing. She worked double shifts at the diner. She learned to fix the apartment's leaking pipes herself. She read Caleb bedtime stories every night, even when she was exhausted beyond words, because she wanted him to know he was loved beyond measure, even without a father. She told herself it was enough. Most days, she almost believed it. That morning, Elena made breakfast while Caleb sat at the small kitchen table, swinging his feet and telling her about a dream he'd had about flying over mountains. She listened, smiling, pouring him a glass of juice, when a knock came at the door. It was too early for visitors. The sun had barely begun to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink outside the kitchen window. Elena wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the door, glancing back once to make sure Caleb stayed at the table. She opened it carefully, expecting perhaps a delivery or a neighbor needing help. Instead, she found herself looking into a face she never thought she would see again. Damien stood on her porch, taller than she remembered, his expression unreadable, his eyes searching her face as though trying to confirm she was truly real. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The years fell away and returned all at once, grief and love and disbelief crashing together inside her chest. "You're alive," she whispered, barely able to form the words. "I could say the same to you," he answered, his voice low, edged with something between anger and relief. Before Elena could respond, small footsteps padded across the kitchen floor behind her. Caleb, curious about the voices at the door, walked up beside his mother and peered around her legs at the stranger standing outside. Damien's gaze dropped to the boy, and everything in him went still. The child looking up at him had his mother's soft face, her gentle mouth, her stubborn chin, but the eyes staring back at Damien were unmistakably his own, amber gold, with the same faint flecks of light that marked every member of his bloodline for generations. There was no mistaking it. This boy was his son. For a moment, the world around Damien seemed to fade into silence. 5 years of grief, of believing he had lost everything that mattered to him, collided with the sight of a small boy standing in a doorway at dawn, sharing his eyes, his blood, his legacy. "Elena," he said, his voice rough with emotion he could not hide. "Is he?" "Yes," she said softly, tears gathering in her eyes. "He's yours." Caleb looked between the two adults, sensing the weight in the air without understanding it. "Mom? Who is he?" Elena knelt down beside her son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, her mind racing with everything she needed to say, everything she had feared saying for 5 long years. "Sweetheart, this is someone very important. Can you go finish your breakfast for a moment? I promise I'll explain everything soon." Caleb hesitated, glancing once more at the stranger with the same eyes as his own, before nodding and retreating back into the kitchen, his young curiosity tempered by his mother's steady voice. Once he was gone, Elena stood and faced Damien fully, bracing herself for his anger, his questions, his judgment. "I thought you were dead," she said. "They told me you fell in battle. I didn't know what else to do. I was carrying your child, and there were people in your court who would have seen him as a danger the moment he was born. I couldn't protect him there. I couldn't protect myself." Damien's jaw tightened, old grief and fresh anger warring across his features. "I searched for you," he said. "After I recovered, after I rebuilt what the war destroyed, I searched every territory for months. When I couldn't find you, I believed you no longer wanted the life we had built together. I believed you left because you regretted us." "Never," Elena said fiercely. "I never regretted a single moment. I left because I loved you both too much to risk losing him the way I almost lost you." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid across 5 lost years. Finally, Damien looked past her, toward the kitchen where Caleb sat quietly at the table, glancing toward the door every few seconds. "I want to know him," Damien said quietly. "I have missed years I can never get back. I do not intend to miss any more." Elena nodded, throat tight with emotion. "He deserves to know his father. I always wanted that for him, even when I thought it wasn't possible." Over the following days, Damien visited often, slowly building a bond with the son he never knew existed. He was patient, careful, letting Caleb come to him in his own time, rather than pushing too quickly. He taught him small things, how to skip stones across the pond near the edge of town, how to identify different birds by their calls. Caleb, in turn, began to open up, laughing more freely, asking endless questions about the father he was only beginning to understand. Elena watched them together with a mixture of joy and quiet fear. She knew that reuniting with Damien meant re-entering a world of danger she had fled from years ago. The pack politics that once threatened her life had not disappeared simply because time had passed. If anything, Damien's enemies within his own court would see Caleb's existence as an even greater threat, now that the boy was old enough to be recognized publicly as an heir. Her fears proved justified sooner than she expected. One evening, as Damien walked Elena and Caleb home from the small park near their apartment, a group of unfamiliar men approached from the shadows of a side street. Elena's instincts, sharpened by years of caution, recognized danger immediately. She pulled Caleb close, but the men moved quickly, clearly intent on separating the boy from his parents. Damien stepped forward without hesitation, positioning himself between his family and the approaching threat. His voice, when he spoke, carried the unmistakable authority of an alpha king, low and commanding, warning the men to stand down. They did not listen. What followed was swift and controlled. Damien, trained and experienced from years of leadership and battle, moved with precision to protect his family, ensuring the men were subdued before they could cause harm. Elena held Caleb tightly throughout, shielding him as best she could, her heart pounding with terror until the danger finally passed. When it was over, Damien knelt beside Elena and Caleb, checking that neither had been harmed, his expression a mixture of fury at the attack and relief that his family remained safe. "They will not stop," Elena said quietly, still shaken. "Not as long as Caleb's existence threatens the succession they want." "They will stop," Damien said firmly, "because I will make certain of it." True to his word, Damien returned to his court and addressed the challenge directly. He gathered his most trusted advisors and members of his council, revealing publicly that Caleb was his son and rightful heir. He made clear that any further threat against his family would be treated as an act of open rebellion against his rule. The declaration sent ripples through the pack, some members expressing shock, others quiet approval, and a smaller faction simmering with resentment they no longer dared act upon openly. Damien's strength as a leader, proven through years of rebuilding his territory after the war, left little room for serious challenge. Slowly, the threat against Elena and Caleb began to fade, replaced by cautious acceptance across the pack. With safety finally within reach, Damien returned once more to Elena's small apartment, standing in the same doorway where he had first seen his son's face weeks earlier. This time, the early morning light spilled gently across the porch, warm and golden, much like it had that first unforgettable dawn. "I am not asking you to hide any longer," Damien said, taking her hands in his. "I am asking you to come home. Not as a secret, not as something to protect from the world, but as my equal, standing beside me as Caleb's mother, and as the woman I have loved since the day we met." Tears filled Elena's eyes, 5 years of fear and loneliness finally beginning to ease. "Are you certain? After everything? After all the danger we still face?" "I have never been more certain of anything," Damien said. "I lost you once because I believed a lie. I will not lose you again." Elena looked toward the kitchen, where Caleb watched them both with wide, hopeful eyes, sensing that something important was happening, something that would shape the rest of their lives together. She turned back to Damien and nodded, a small, tearful smile breaking across her face. "Then take us home." Weeks later, as the sun rose over the Blackthorn territory, painting the sky in soft gold, Elena stood beside Damien, on the balcony of the estate that would now be their family's home. Caleb ran across the courtyard below, laughing freely, chasing after a young wolf pup that had quickly become his closest companion. Elena leaned against Damien's shoulder, watching their son grow up in the light of a life they had both feared impossible. The years of hiding, of fear, of raising Caleb alone in the shadows, had finally given way to something brighter. As the golden dawn spread across the land, Damien pressed a gentle kiss to Elena's forehead, and together, they watched their son play beneath a sky finally free of secrets. They were, at last, a family whole,